The first thing I saw was the white ceiling. Perfect. Unforgiving white. It was made of tiles. Little squares with tiny, random holes. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 19. 19 holes in the tile directly above me. The air smelled sharp, like lemons and something else I couldn't name. Something clean and cold. A machine beeped steadily to my left. A rhythm that felt alien to my own heartbeat. It was the loneliest sound in the world. My head felt heavy, wrapped in a thick fog. Where was I? A memory surfaced, sharp and cruel. A face. 2 faces. My son, Michael. His expression tight with a discomfort he couldn't hide. And his wife, Sarah. Her eyes like polished stones, clear and hard. Her voice echoed in the fog of my mind, not as a memory, but as if she were whispering right into my ear. Mom, with all due respect, you're a stranger to us now. A stranger. The word twisted inside me. A cold knife. A stranger to my own son? To the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose favorite bedtime stories I still knew by heart. The beeping of the machine seemed to get louder, faster, counting down to something terrible. I closed my eyes, wanting only to sink back into the darkness, away from that voice, away from that sterile, white room. The fog thickened, and the world dissolved, pulling me back to 2 days before, when the world still made sense. 2 days earlier, the sun had streamed through my kitchen window, painting golden stripes across the worn linoleum floor. It was a Sunday, my favorite day of the week. Sunday meant family. It meant Michael, Sarah, and my grandchildren, Leo and Mia, would soon be filling the quiet rooms of my house with noise and life. The house craved it. Sometimes, I felt the old walls sighing in the silence, waiting, just like me. My home in Maple Creek, Ohio, wasn't grand. It was a simple 2-story house, the kind with a porch swing out front and a garden in the back that my late husband, Tom, had tended with loving hands. Every corner held a memory. The faint pencil marks on the doorframe in the hallway tracked Michael's growth from a wobbly toddler to a young man who towered over me. The worn spot on the armchair in the living room was where Tom used to sit, reading the paper every evening. And this kitchen, this was the heart of it all. This was where I had poured all my love into countless meals, believing that food was another way to say, I love you. Today's menu was special. Pot roast, slow cooked for hours until it was tender enough to fall apart with a fork. Mashed potatoes, creamy and rich with butter. And for dessert, Michael's favorite since he was 5 years old, apple crumble with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. The scent of cinnamon and baking apples filled the air. A warm, sweet perfume that I hoped would welcome them home. As I peeled the last of the apples, I glanced at the photograph on the windowsill. It was of Tom and me, taken on our 30th wedding anniversary, not long before he passed. He had his arm around me, his smile wide and genuine. Oh, Tom, I whispered to the picture, a habit I'd never broken. You should see Michael now. Such a successful architect. And the kids, they're growing so fast. You'd be so proud. A pang of loneliness hit me, swift and familiar. It was a constant companion these days, a quiet ache that sat just beneath the surface of my busy retirement. I had my friends, my garden, my books, but my world, my true purpose, had always revolved around my family. Since Tom was gone, that focus had narrowed to Michael and his children. They were my sun, and I was just a small planet, content to orbit around their light. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of excitement through me. I wiped my hands on my apron, smoothed my hair, and hurried to the front door, my heart fluttering like a teenager's. I opened it just as Michael was helping little Mia out of her car seat. "Grandma!" she yelled, running toward me with open arms. I scooped her up, burying my face in her hair. It smelled like sunshine and that fruity shampoo Sarah always used. "There's my girl," I laughed, hugging her tight. Leo followed, a bit more reserved at 10 years old, and gave me a quick, shy hug. "Hi, Mom," Michael said, managing a tired smile as he approached. He kissed my cheek. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. The stress of his job, of providing for his family, was etched onto his face. "Hi, honey. You look like you need a good meal." "Always," he said, trying for a light tone. Sarah was last to get out of the car, busy on her phone. She was a corporate lawyer, sharp and ambitious, always put together. Today she wore a crisp white blouse and tailored slacks, looking more like she'd come from a business meeting than a family dinner. "Eleanor," she said, her smile polite but not quite reaching her eyes. "The house smells wonderful, as always." "Sarah, welcome. Come in. Come in. All of you. Dinner's almost ready." I ushered them inside, my spirit soaring. For a few hours, the house would feel whole again. The silence would be broken by the chatter of my grandchildren and the familiar cadence of my son's voice. Leo and Mia immediately ran to the old toy chest in the living room, pulling out the worn-out board games and wooden blocks they only ever played with here. I watched them for a moment, my heart swelling. This house was their history, too. But as we gathered in the dining room, a subtle tension began to creep in. Sarah ran a finger over the mahogany dining table, a piece Tom and I had bought at an antique store on our honeymoon. "You know, Eleanor," she said casually, "they have amazing new finishes for these old tables. A light sanding and a modern stain would really brighten up this room." I felt a small prickle of defensiveness. "Oh, but I love the dark wood. It has character." "It's just a bit dated," she replied, looking around the room. "This whole house could use an update. The lighting is so dim." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sarah, it's Mom's house. It's cozy." "Of course, dear. It's very cozy." The way she said the word made it sound like a flaw. I tried to steer the conversation to safer ground. I asked Leo about his soccer team and Mia about her ballet lessons. They chattered excitedly, and for a while, the mood lightened. But I could see Michael and Sarah exchanging glances. They were worried about something. I knew it. A mother always knows. During a lull in the conversation, as I was clearing the main course plates, I decided to bring it up. I knew they had been trying to save for a bigger house in a better school district. I'd overheard them talking about it on the phone a few weeks ago, their voices strained with worry about interest rates and down payments. "Michael, Sarah," I began, my hands clasped together on the table. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." They both looked at me, their attention suddenly sharp. "This house," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I gestured around the room. "It's too big for one person. It's full of memories, wonderful memories. But memories don't need this much space." Michael frowned, looking confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding with a mixture of love and nervous excitement. I was about to offer them the world, the solution to all their problems. I was about to give them the ultimate gift, the final, most meaningful act of a mother's love. "I want you to have the life you deserve," I said, my voice soft but sure. "The big house with the beautiful yard for the kids. The best schools. I know how hard you're both working, and I want to help." I looked from Michael's worried face to Sarah's guarded one, convinced my next words would make them break into smiles of relief and gratitude. "I've made a decision. I'm going to sell this house. We can use the money for your down payment. And I can move in with you. You're already planning to have a guest room, right? I won't be any trouble at all. I can help with the kids, with the cooking. We can be a proper family, all under one roof." Finished, my chest tight with the sheer rightness of it all. I smiled, waiting for their happy response. But it never came. Instead, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the table. The only sound was the gentle hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Sarah's polite smile had vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. And Michael just stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. The beautiful dream I had just painted began to crack, right before my very eyes. The silence stretched, thin and tight, pulling the air from the room. My smile faltered, feeling foolish and painted on. I looked at Michael, pleading with my eyes for him to understand, to say something, to bridge the sudden, icy gap that had opened between us. He just stared down at the table, tracing the wood grain with his finger as if it held the answers to a difficult exam. Sarah was the first to break it. Her voice was calm, measured, the same tone she probably used with a difficult client. A voice designed to de-escalate while conceding nothing. "Eleanor," she began, placing her fork down with deliberate precision. "That is an incredibly generous thought. But it's not that simple." I didn't understand. What wasn't simple? I was offering them a dream, a key to their future. Why did she look at me like I had suggested something monstrous? "Of course it is, dear," I said, my voice a little too bright. "It's the perfect solution. I wouldn't be a burden. Promise. I would have my own little space. And I'd be there to help with Leo and Mia. Think of all the money you'd save on babysitters." A flicker of something annoyance maybe crossed Sarah's face before she smoothed it over. "It's not about the money. Not really. It's about boundaries. Independence. Michael and I have a way we like to do things, a rhythm to our life. Adding another person to the household, it changes the dynamic." "But I'm not another person," I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm your family. I'm Michael's mother." Michael finally looked up, but his eyes darted away from mine. "Mom, it's a very generous offer. But Sarah's right. Things are different now. It's complicated." "What's complicated?" I asked, my heart beginning to sink. The beautiful image of our future together was dissolving into smoke. "I raised you in this house, Michael. We were a family under one roof. All I want is to feel like part of that family again." That was the wrong thing to say. I saw it in the way Sarah's jaw tightened. "Eleanor, we are a family," she said, her voice losing its patient edge and gaining a sharper, colder one. "Michael, myself, Leo, and Mia. That is our family unit. We have our own life to build, our own problems to solve. We can't be responsible for your happiness, too." The word responsible hit me like a slap. I had never thought of myself as a responsibility. I was a source of love, of support, a safety net. Wasn't I? "I'm not asking you to be responsible for me," I whispered, the food in my stomach turning to stone. "I'm offering to help you." "By selling your home? Your only major asset?" Sarah shot back, leaning forward slightly. "And what happens in 10, 15 years? When you have health problems, the financial burden would fall entirely on us. We'd be trapped. Is that what you want for your son? For your grandchildren?" Her words were surgical, cutting away my good intentions and exposing them as something selfish and foolish. She made my love sound like a liability. I looked at Michael, my last hope. He was the buffer. He was my son. He would defend me. "Michael?" I pleaded. He let out a long, weary sigh, rubbing his temples. "Mom, please try to understand. We're under a lot of pressure. My firm just lost a major contract. We're stretched so thin as it is. We can't take on anything else right now. Not even something that seems like a gift." His voice was full of apology, but his words were a clear alignment with his wife. He was choosing her, their life, over me. It was natural. It was right. But it hurt more than I could have ever imagined. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. So that's it? I'm something else to be taken on? Project? A burden? The argument had grown tense, and the children were now watching, their eyes wide and uncertain. Leo nudged his fork into his mashed potatoes, his appetite gone. Mia looked like she was about to cry. Sarah saw it, and her expression hardened. She stood up abruptly. I think we should go, she announced. The kids are getting tired. She began gathering their things with brisk, efficient movements, avoiding my gaze entirely. It was then that she delivered the final blow. I was looking at Michael, still hoping for a sign, a glance, a word of comfort. But he wouldn't look at me. Sarah paused by the door, her coat half on, and looked at me. There was no anger in her face, just a cold, hard finality. We have our own family to think about, Eleanor, she said, her voice low but clear, each word a perfectly formed shard of ice. You have your life. We have ours. Honestly, you're a stranger to our new life. A stranger. The word hung in the air between us, monstrous and absolute. It landed in the center of my chest and shattered everything inside me. Michael stood frozen for a second, his mouth slightly open as if to protest, but no sound came out. His silence was his agreement. He heard the cruelest thing anyone could say to his mother, and he did nothing. He let it stand. Come on, Michael, Sarah said, her voice impatient. He flinched, then moved like a puppet, gathering the children who were now confused and starting to whine. He paused at the door, just for a moment, and finally looked at me. I saw a flicker of guilt, of deep, profound sadness in his eyes. Mom, he started, but he couldn't finish. He just shook his head and followed his family out into the night. The front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. I stood there, motionless, in the middle of the dining room. The room was suddenly huge and empty. The smell of the pot roast, which had seemed so warm and comforting just an hour ago, now seemed cloying, sickening. On the table, the plates were half-eaten. The apple crumble, Michael's favorite, sat on the counter, untouched. Perfect, beautiful dessert with no one to eat it. I slowly sank into a chair. The silence they left behind was heavier, louder than their argument, pressed in on me from all sides. I wasn't just alone in the house. I was alone in the world. A stranger. The word played over and over in my head. A stranger to the life I had created, the son I had raised. Had I been so blind? Had I been living in a world of my own making? A fantasy where my love was still essential, where my place was still secure. It seemed that while I was busy tending to the memories in my quiet house, their world had moved on without me, and they had left me so far behind that they could no longer see me at all. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark living room, wrapped in one of Tom's old cardigans, and watched the hours tick by on the grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick, each talk was a measure of my new reality, a reminder that time was moving forward. But I was stuck, frozen in the moment. My heart had been broken by the people I loved most. The foundation of my entire life, the unwavering belief in my family's love, had crumbled to dust, and I had no idea what, if anything, I could build in its place. The sun rose. I hadn't moved. The gray light of dawn crept into the living room, revealing the dust motes dancing in the air and the sad, congealed remains of a feast that never was. My body ached with a stiffness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with grief. It was the physical manifestation of a frozen heart. I finally pushed myself up from the armchair, my joints protesting. The house was deathly quiet. This was not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning, but an aggressive, empty silence that seemed to magnify my loneliness. Every tick of the clock was a hammer blow against my skull. My first instinct, a primal urge that had been wired into me for 40 years, was to fix it, to smooth things over, to apologize, even though I wasn't sure what for. Maybe for wanting to be too close. Maybe for loving them too much. I found my phone on the kitchen counter. Its screen dark. My hands trembled as I dialed Michael's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring tightening the knot in my stomach. Then, it went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Michael. Leave a message." His voice was cheerful, professional, a stranger's voice. I couldn't speak. What would I say? "Hello, son. It's the stranger who raised you?" I hung up, my throat tight. Maybe a text was better. Less confrontational. Safer. I typed and deleted several messages, my thumbs feeling clumsy and slow. Finally, I settled on something simple. "Honey, I'm so sorry about last night. I didn't mean to upset you. Please call me when you can. I love you." I stared at the message, the 3 simple words at the end looking hollow and weak. I hit send, then set the phone on the counter as if it were a venomous snake. I spent the next hour watching it, willing it to light up with a reply. I cleaned the kitchen with robotic movements, scraping the beautiful pot roast into the trash can, each piece feeling like a part of my heart. The uneaten apple crumble followed. The kitchen was spotless, but the emptiness inside me only grew. Finally, the phone buzzed. My heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. I snatched it up. A new message from Michael. "I'm busy. Mom. Can't talk now." That was it. No "I love you too." No "we'll talk later." No apology for his silence, for his wife's cruelty. Just 4 words. A dismissal. A digital door slammed in my face. The hope that had flickered within me was extinguished, leaving behind a cold, bitter ash. Sarah had called me a stranger, and now my own son was treating me like one. An inconvenient, annoying stranger. The tears I had held back all night finally came, hot and unstoppable. I collapsed at the kitchen table and wept, not loudly, but with deep, silent, body-shaking sobs. I cried for my husband, who never would have let this happen. I cried for the little boy who used to think I was the center of the universe. I cried for the woman I used to be. A woman who had a purpose, a place. A woman who was not a stranger in her own life. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving me exhausted and hollowed out. I knew I couldn't stay in that house, in that suffocating silence, for one more minute. There was only one person I could turn to. I drove the 10 minutes to Carol's house on autopilot, my mind a merciful blank. Carol had been my best friend since we were both young teachers at Maple Creek Elementary. She understood me. We had seen each other through everything: marriage, motherhood, and the shared, quiet grief of widowhood. She opened the door before I even knocked, a mug of coffee in her hand. One look at my face and her bright, cheerful expression melted into one of concern. "Oh, Ellie," she said softly. "Get in here right now." She led me to her sunny breakfast nook, which was filled with plants and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. It was the complete opposite of my own dark, silent house. She didn't press me for details. She just sat another mug in front of me, filled it with coffee, and waited. And then, it all poured out. The story of the disastrous dinner, my hopeful, naive offer, Sarah's cold, clinical rejection, and Michael's terrible, crushing silence. I told her the final, fatal word. She called me a stranger. Carol, a stranger. And Michael just let her. Carol listened patiently, her hand resting on mine. When I was finished, she was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. I expected her to say the usual things. "Oh, they were just stressed. Sarah didn't mean it. Michael will come around." But Carol was never one for platitudes. "Okay," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "That's horrible. What Sarah said was cruel. And Michael acted like a coward. Your pain is completely, 100% valid. I felt a small wave of relief. She believed me. She understood. But, she continued, looking me straight in the eye. I'm going to ask you a question. And I want you to be honest with me. For the last 40 years, who have you been? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I've been me. Eleanor Vance. No, she said, shaking her head gently. That's your name. I'm asking who you've been. You've been Tom's wife. You've been Michael's mother. You've been Leo and Mia's grandmother. You have lived your entire life in service to those roles. And they are wonderful roles. Ellie, don't get me wrong. But they are all defined by other people. She leaned closer, her gaze intense. So I'll ask you again. Eleanor, you have spent your whole life living for them. Where, in all of that, is a life for you? Her words were like a splash of cold water. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, to list all the things I did. My gardening, my book club. But even those things felt connected to my family. I gardened because Tom loved it. I joined the book club to have something to talk to Sarah about. Carol was right. I had built my entire identity on the foundation of my family. And now that foundation was gone. I was nothing. A ghost in a house full of memories. I don't know. I admitted. The words tasting like failure. Exactly. Carol said, squeezing my hand. You don't know. And that's terrifying. But it can also be an opportunity. Michael and Sarah have drawn a line in the sand. They've told you who you are to them. Now, you get to decide who you are to yourself. She stood up and walked over to a cluttered bookshelf. What did you love to do? Ellie? Before Tom. Before Michael. When you were just Eleanor. What made your heart sing? I had to think. To dig back through decades of memories. I used to paint. I said faintly. Watercolors. Mostly landscapes. Barn. Fields. The river. See? Carol's face lit up. You loved it. You were good at it. Too. I still have that painting you did of the old covered bridge. It's hanging in my hallway. She came back to the table. Her energy infectious. That's where you start. Not with them. Not with what you've lost. You start with what you've forgotten. Go home. Ellie. Go up to that dusty attic. Find those old paints. And create something that is just for you. Leaving Carol's house. Felt a tiny, fragile spark of something that wasn't despair. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was more like curiosity. The idea was so foreign. To do something purely for myself? Not for praise. Not for a gift. Not to make someone else happy. Just for me. When I got home, the house felt just as empty. But my purpose had shifted. I wasn't just aimlessly wandering through my grief. I had a mission. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the folding ladder to the attic. The air upstairs was thick with the scent of old wood. And time itself. It was a museum of my family's life. Cardboard boxes were labeled in my neat handwriting. Michael's school papers grades 1 to 5. Tom's fishing gear. Holiday decorations. It was a difficult place to be. Every object was a memory. A tie to the life that had just been declared over. In the far corner, under a yellowed bedsheet, I found it. My old wooden easel. And beside it, a heavy wooden box. I blew a layer of dust off the top and opened it. There they were. My brushes. Their bristles stiff with age. My collection of watercolor tubes. Many of them hardened and cracked. My paper. Yellowed and brittle at the edges. I carried the supplies downstairs. Not to the bright kitchen. But to Michael's old bedroom. It had been preserved. Almost perfectly. Since he left for college. His baseball trophies were on the shelf. His posters were still on the wall. This was my sanctuary of motherhood. I set up the easel by the window. which looked out over the backyard. The afternoon light was soft and golden. I found a tube of blue paint that was still soft, squeezed a small amount onto a ceramic plate, and dipped a brush into a jar of water. I stared at the blank white sheet of paper. I was going to paint the old oak tree in the backyard, the one Tom had planted the year Michael was born. But as I lifted the brush, my hand froze. All I could see was Michael as a little boy, climbing that tree. I saw him and his father building a treehouse in its branches. I saw him and Sarah taking pictures under it on their wedding day. The tree wasn't just a tree. It was a monument to the family I no longer had. The brush trembled in my hand. The blue watercolor dripped onto the pristine white paper. Single, perfect tear. I couldn't do it. Everything was a memory. Everything was a reminder. Carol was wrong. There was no me separate from them. They had not just been a part of my life. They were my life. And without them, I was as blank and empty as the paper in front of me. Defeated. I left the easel standing in Michael's room like a lonely sentinel. The single blue tear on the white paper mocked me. It was a testament to my failure to find a life outside of what I had lost. The days that followed blurred into a gray, monotonous fog. I moved through my house like a ghost, performing the tasks of living without any of the feeling. I ate toast for dinner. I left the television on for noise, but didn't watch it. I answered the phone only when I was certain it was Carol. The house, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. Every object whispered a story of a happier time. The worn armchair where Tom sat. The tiny chip on a coffee mug from when Michael dropped it as a child. These small, physical memories were no longer comforting. They were tiny daggers, each one a fresh prick of pain. My home was an archive of a life that no longer existed, and I was its lonely, grieving curator. Carol called every day. "Did you paint anything?" she'd ask, her voice full of gentle encouragement. "No," I'd reply, my voice flat. "I'm not ready." "All right, Ellie," she'd say, never pushing. "How about a walk then? The autumn leaves are beautiful right now." I always refused. The thought of going out, of seeing other families, happy people living their intact lives, was more than I could bear. My grief felt intensely private, something shameful that needed to be hidden away behind my drawn curtains. One afternoon, about a week after the dinner, I decided the clutter was part of the problem. If my house was a museum, I needed to start putting some of the exhibits away. I started with the storage shed in the backyard, a place I hadn't touched in years. It was filled with things that weren't precious enough for the attic but were too sentimental to throw away. Old lawn furniture, Michael's rusty first bicycle, broken gardening tools Tom had always meant to fix. If I could just clear a small space, I reasoned, I might feel a sliver of control over my own life. I pulled on a pair of old gardening gloves and got to work. It was dusty, and spiders had claimed every corner as their own. As I moved a stack of old terracotta pots, I spotted it. An old wooden stepladder, tucked away behind a lawnmower. There was a high shelf in the back of the shed that held boxes of old magazines and newspapers. They were heavy, yellowed, and pointless. Getting rid of them felt like a good, solid, achievable goal. I pulled the stepladder out. It was one of Tom's, a bit rickety, but I'd seen him use it 100 times. I opened it up, the old wood groaning in protest. It felt steady enough. I climbed the first step, then the second, reaching for the heaviest box on the corner of the shelf. My fingers gripped the dusty cardboard. It was heavier than I thought. I pulled. The box didn't budge at first. Then it shifted suddenly. And as it did, my world tilted. One of the ladder's legs, weakened by years of damp and disuse, gave way with a sickening crack. The sudden lurch sent me off balance. For a horrifying, weightless second, I was suspended in the air. The box of old papers tumbled with me. I threw my arms out, a useless, instinctive gesture to break my fall. I landed hard on the concrete floor. My head slammed against the leg of the lawnmower with a dull, echoing thud that seemed to reverberate through my entire skull. A blinding, white-hot pain shot through my left ankle. I cried out. A sharp, ragged sound that was immediately swallowed by the cluttered confines of the shed. Then, everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. It could have been minutes or hours. When I came to, the world swam back into focus slowly. Painfully. The first thing I was aware of was the pain. My head was throbbing with a deep, pulsing ache. My ankle was on fire. A sharp, unrelenting agony that made me gasp. Dusk had fallen. The only light in the shed was a single, dusty beam slanting through the grimy window, illuminating a chaotic scene of scattered magazines and my own sprawled form. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and rust. I tried to push myself up, but a wave of dizziness washed over me, so intense it made me nauseous. Fell back, my head hitting the concrete again. This time more gently. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into the edges of my pain-fogged mind. I was hurt. I was alone. No one knew where I was. Carol would assume I was just ignoring her calls again. Michael. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, turning into a pained groan. Michael wouldn't even notice my absence. He was too busy. He had his own family. Help. I whispered, the word a dry rasp in my throat. Somebody. Help me. My voice was pathetic, a tiny sound in the vast, indifferent silence of the evening. The houses in my neighborhood were set far apart, separated by large yards and old trees. No one would hear me. I had to get to a phone. My cell phone was inside, on the kitchen counter. The house seemed miles away. Gritting my teeth against the fire in my ankle, I tried to move. I propped myself up on my elbows, my arms shaking with the effort. The world spun violently. I closed my eyes, took a few deep breaths, and waited for it to settle. Then, I began to crawl. It was the most agonizing journey of my life. Every movement sent a fresh jolt of pain through my ankle and head. I dragged myself through the dirt and spiderwebs on the shed floor, my useless left leg trailing behind me. My nightgown tore on a stray nail. Splinters dug into the palms of my hands. But I kept going, fueled by a primal fear of being left to die alone in the dark. It took an eternity to reach the door of the shed. I fumbled with the rusty handle, my fingers slick with sweat and dirt. It finally creaked open. The cool night air hit my face. A welcome relief. The back porch light was on. A small, hopeful beacon in the darkness. It was only about 30 feet away. It might as well have been the moon. I pulled myself out of the shed and started across the damp grass. The journey was a slow, torturous crawl. Blades of grass stuck to my cheeks. A small stone dug into my knee. I fixed my eyes on the porch light, making it my only goal. Don't think about the pain. Don't think about Michael. Don't think about being a stranger. Just get to the light. When my hand finally touched the cold wood of the bottom porch step, a sob of pure relief broke from my lips. I was almost there. I hauled my body up the first step, then the second. My arms screamed in protest, my muscles burning. I finally collapsed onto the porch, my cheek pressed against the rough, painted wood. The back door was locked. Or it was. I always locked it. For a moment, pure, unadulterated despair washed over me. I had come so far, only to be defeated by a simple lock. I was going to die right here, on my own back porch, just feet away from safety. I closed my eyes, ready to give up. But then, a memory surfaced. Tom. He always used to hide a spare key under the big ceramic frog planter next to the door. For emergencies. Ellie. He'd said with a wink. You never know. Oh, Tom. Even now, you're taking care of me. With renewed determination, I dragged myself the last few feet to the planter. My fingers scrabbled in the cold, damp dirt beneath it. And then I felt it. Cool. Familiar shape of a key. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. When I finally heard the click of the tumbler turning, I almost cried with gratitude. I pushed the door open and half fell. Half crawled into my own kitchen. I was home. I was safe. But the journey wasn't over. The phone was on the wall. An old-fashioned landline. A relic from another era that I'd never gotten rid of. It was my only link to help. I pulled myself across the linoleum floor, leaving a smear of dirt and grime in my wake. Using a kitchen chair, I dragged myself upright, my vision graying out at the edges from the pain and exertion. My fingers trembled as I punched the 3 numbers I had never in my 65 years imagined I would have to call for myself. 911. Calm, professional voice answered immediately. 911. What's your emergency? I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a choked sob. Ma'am? Are you there? What is your emergency? I took a shuddering breath. I fell. I managed to say, my voice cracking. I think my leg is broken. And my head. This moment was a profound, terrifying revelation. For my entire adult life, my emergency contact, the first person I would call in a crisis, was my family. First Tom, then Michael. But tonight, as I clung to my kitchen wall in agony, the person I called for help was a complete stranger. It was a brutal, physical confirmation of what Sarah had said. In my moment of greatest need, my family was not there. I was utterly, terrifyingly on my own, and I had to rely on the kindness of strangers to save me. The realization was as painful as any of my physical injuries. The paramedics were kind and efficient. They spoke in calm, reassuring tones as they assessed my injuries, carefully splinting my swollen, discolored ankle and checking my pupils with a small flashlight. They asked me questions I could barely answer. My name, my age, what day it was. I think I got them right. The world was still tilted, the edges blurry and indistinct. Being lifted onto the gurney and wheeled out of my own home was a surreal experience. I saw my life from a strange new angle. The ceiling with the faint water stain I'd always meant to paint over. The grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging silently, marking time without me. I was a passive object being removed from the scene of my life. As they carried me into the bright, flashing lights of the ambulance, I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else. The hospital was a blur of white walls, antiseptic smells, and hurried voices. I was moved from the ambulance to a bed in the emergency room, a small curtained cubicle that became my entire world. Nurses and doctors came and went, a procession of strangers in scrubs. They took my blood pressure, attached an 4 to my hand, and wheeled me away for x-rays that confirmed what the fire in my ankle already knew, a clean break in the fibula. A kind-faced doctor with tired eyes came to my bedside to deliver the news about my head. You have a moderate concussion, Mrs. Vance, he explained, his voice gentle. We need to keep you overnight for observation. We'll also need to contact a family member. Who should we call? The question I had been dreading. My throat tightened. For a moment, I was tempted to say there was no one. Felt true. But the responsible, motherly part of me, the part that had been in charge for so long, knew it was the proper thing to do. If something worse happened, Michael had a right to know. My son, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Michael Vance. I gave the nurse his number, feeling a fresh wave of shame. He was going to be pulled away from his dinner, from bathing his children, from his important, busy life, to deal with his clumsy, burdensome mother. I was exactly what Sarah had accused me of being, a problem that needed solving. I must have drifted off after that, lulled into a shallow, pain-filled sleep by the medication they'd given me. When I opened my eyes again, they were there. Michael and Sarah, standing at the foot of my bed. Michael's face was a mess of conflicting emotions. I could see the genuine worry in his eyes, the pallor of his skin under the harsh fluorescent lights. But I could also see the exhaustion, the deep, bone-weary frustration of a man who had just been handed one more crisis he didn't have the capacity to handle. Sarah's expression was less complicated. It was a mask of polite concern. But her eyes were sharp, analytical. She wasn't looking at me. She was assessing a situation. Her gaze darted from the forebag to the monitor beside my bed, to the bulky cast on my leg, calculating the cost, the inconvenience, the sheer logistical nightmare of it all. "Mom," Michael said, his voice low. "My God. What happened?" "I fell," I said simply. There was no point in explaining the details. The ladder. The foolish attempt to clean the shed. It would only sound pathetic. "In the shed." "The shed? What were you doing in there?" he asked, a hint of exasperation in his tone. Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's arm, a gesture that was both supportive and restraining. "The important thing is that you're okay, Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "We were so worried when the hospital called." The lie was so bald, so obvious. It was almost insulting. They weren't worried for me. They were worried about what this meant for them. "The doctor said I have a concussion and a broken ankle," I told them, watching their faces for a reaction. Michael winced. "A broken ankle? Oh, Mom, how long will you be in a cast?" 6 weeks. Maybe more," I said. "And I can't put any weight on it." The implications of that statement hung heavy in the air. 6 weeks of helplessness. 6 weeks of needing care. I saw the silent calculation happen in real time on Sarah's face. 6 weeks of canceled plans, of extra work, of their precious, carefully constructed schedule being thrown into chaos. "Well," Sarah said, breaking the tense silence with a brisk, businesslike tone, "we'll have to make arrangements. Then, I'll call your insurance provider first thing in the morning to see what kind of in-home care is covered. There are some excellent nursing services in the area. We can probably have someone come in a few hours a day to help you with meals and personal care." She said personal care with a slight, almost imperceptible grimace. The thought of a stranger bathing me, helping me dress, it was a violation I hadn't even considered. But it was nothing compared to the violation of hearing my daughter-in-law plan my life as if I were a difficult file on her desk. Michael, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "Or, maybe she could stay with us for a little while?" he suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. He didn't look at Sarah as he said it. Sarah turned to him, her smile tight. "Honey, be realistic. Our house isn't set up for that. The guest room is upstairs. How would she get to the bathroom? And with your workload, in my cases, it's just not practical. The best thing for your mother is to have professional care in her own home, where she's comfortable, where she's out of our way." I thought. The words were unspoken, but I heard them as clearly as if she had shouted them. They never once offered the simple, human comfort I craved. No one said, "Don't worry, Mom, we'll take care of you." No one held my hand. Michael kept a safe distance at the foot of the bed, caught between his guilt and his wife's unyielding pragmatism. The conversation continued around me, as if I wasn't even there. They talked about medical equipment rentals, physical therapy appointments, prescription pickups. Their voices were a low, anxious murmur, the soundtrack to my own obsolescence. I was no longer a person. I was a project. A complicated, expensive, and deeply inconvenient project. I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me, cutting through the fog of pain and medication. The fall had been a physical shock. But this was a spiritual one. I was seeing my children, my son, and the woman he had chosen with no illusions. The love I had poured into them for decades had not created a bond. It had created a sense of obligation, and that obligation was now being weighed, measured, and found wanting. They would do their duty. They would make the arrangements. But they would do it with resentment, not with love. And in the long term, Sarah was saying, her voice dropping to a more serious register, we really need to consider other options. A place with assisted living capabilities might be the most responsible choice. There's a very nice facility, green pastures, just outside of town. I have a colleague whose mother is there. They have excellent amenities. Green pastures. It sounded like a place you sent an old horse to die. The words she'd spoken at dinner echoed in my mind. You're a stranger to our new life. I finally understood what she meant. They were building a future. And in that future, there was no room for a broken, aging mother. I was a relic from the past, a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the decor. And they were already discussing the best way to move me into storage. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep. I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. I couldn't bear to see the mixture of pity and annoyance on my son's face, or the cool, detached efficiency in my daughter-in-law's eyes. I listened as they whispered for a few more minutes, then heard their footsteps retreating. We'll be back in the morning, Mom, Michael said softly from the doorway. Try to get some rest. I didn't answer. I lay there in the sterile silence of the hospital room, the rhythmic beep of the monitor my only companion. The physical pain in my head and my ankle was a dull, distant ache compared to the sharp, searing agony in my heart. They would be back in the morning. Not with love, but with a plan. A plan to manage me. A plan to contain the problem I had become. And in that moment, I knew I could not let them. My life, broken and battered as it was still my own. And I would not let them put me away in a box, no matter how nice the label was. I lay awake for the rest of the night, staring at the perforated ceiling tiles, my mind clearer than it had been in years. The physical pain was a constant, throbbing presence, but it served as an anchor, keeping me grounded in the harsh reality of the moment. The emotional pain, the deep, soul-crushing ache of rejection, was transforming. The grief was still there, a massive, heavy stone in my chest, but something else was growing around it, a hard, cold anger. It was an anger I had never allowed myself to feel before. I had always been the peacemaker, the accommodate, the one who smoothed over rough edges and swallowed her own feelings for the sake of family harmony. But there was no harmony left to save. They had burned the bridge and left me on the other side. My anger wasn't hot and explosive. It was a quiet, glacial rage. It was the anger of a woman who had finally, brutally, been forced to see her own worth by having it so completely disregarded. They thought I was fragile. They saw a broken old woman, problem to be managed. They were already arranging my life into neat, convenient boxes in home care, physical therapy, green pastures. They had taken my fall not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to finally remove me from their path. A nurse came in at dawn to check my vitals. She was a young woman with a kind smile and gentle hands. How are you feeling this morning, Eleanor? She asked, her name tag reading Chloe. I feel clear, I said, and the words surprised me with their truth. She smiled. The doctor will be in soon to discuss your discharge plan. My discharge plan. Their discharge plan. The one Michael and Sarah had already started designing. I made a decision in that moment. A decision born of pain and anger and a sudden, fierce desire for self-preservation. My life was not a logistical problem for them to solve. It was mine. The choices from here on out would be mine. When Michael and Sarah arrived a few hours later, I was ready. I had pushed the button to raise the head of my bed. And though I was wearing a flimsy hospital gown and my hair was a tangled mess, I felt more powerful than I had in decades. They came in carrying coffee cups, looking like they were heading into a difficult but necessary business negotiation. Sarah had a notepad and pen. The sight of it almost made me laugh. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, her tone bright and professional. "How did you sleep?" "I didn't," I replied, my voice steady. "I was thinking. We've been on the phone all morning," Michael began, looking tired but determined to be helpful. "Sarah has a list of vetted home care agencies, and I've been looking at rental options for a hospital bed. We think it would be best if we set it up in the downstairs living room, so you don't have to worry about the stairs." They had it all figured out. My living room, the heart of my home, was to be turned into a sick room. My life was to be medicalized, scheduled, and supervised by paid strangers. I held up a hand, a simple gesture that silenced them both. They looked at me, surprised. I had never interrupted them before. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice calm and even. I looked directly at Michael, then shifted my gaze to Sarah. "And thank you for all the thought you've put into this. But your help will not be necessary." Michael frowned in confusion. "Mom, what are you talking about? You can't take care of yourself. Your leg is broken." "I am aware of my current physical limitations, Michael," I said, the formality in my tone creating a distance between us. "But I can, and I will, take care of myself." Sarah's polite mask slipped. A flicker of impatience crossed her face. "Eleanor, this isn't the time to be proud or stubborn. This is a serious situation. You need professional help." "I agree," I said, "and I will arrange for it myself. I will hire who I need. When I need them, I will decide what equipment I need and where it goes in my own home. These will be my decisions." I took a breath, gathering my strength for what I had to say next. I looked at my son, at the boy I had raised, and felt a pang of sorrow for the man he had become. But the sorrow was overwhelmed by the need to protect what was left of myself. "Last Sunday," I said, my voice unwavering, "you both made your position very clear. You have your own family, your own life. You told me I was a stranger to that life." Michael flinched, the color draining from his face. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Sarah, however, held my gaze, her expression unreadable but defiant. "You were right," I continued, speaking directly to her now. "I was a stranger. I was a stranger to your pressures, to your ambitions, to the rules of your new world. But you were also strangers to me. I didn't recognize the coldness in your heart, Sarah. And Michael," I turned back to my son, "I didn't recognize your weakness." The words were brutal, but they were true. And the truth, I was discovering, was a liberating thing. So from now on, we will proceed as strangers do, with respect and with boundaries. My home is my own. My life is my own. I will not be a burden to you, because I will no longer be a part of your daily equation. I am discharging myself from that role." Michael looked utterly stricken. "Mom, no, that's not. We're your family." "Are you?" I asked, a genuine question. Family doesn't make you feel like a problem to be solved. Family doesn't discuss putting you in a home while you're lying in a hospital bed. Family shows up, not with notepads and plans, but with love, with comfort, with a hand to hold. Silence. The heavy silence filled the small room. Sarah's face was now a tight mask of anger. She had been challenged, her authority undermined. I had refused to play the part she had assigned me. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "So this is how it's going to be. You're going to cut us off. After everything you what? Sarah." I cut her off, my voice sharp for the first time. "Everything you've done for me? Or everything I've done for you? For Michael? For this family? My entire life?" She had no answer. I leaned back against the pillow, feeling a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a sense of release. I had said it. I had spoken the truth that had been festering inside me. I had drawn my own line in the sand. I would like you to leave now, I said quietly. The doctor and I will work out my discharge plan. I will call a taxi to take me home. I will handle it. Michael looked like he was about to break. Tears welled in his eyes. Mom, please don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His apology, finally offered, felt like it was years too late. It was a bandage for a mortal wound. I know you are, Michael, I said, and my voice softened with a flicker of the maternal love that would never truly die. But being sorry isn't enough right now. Right now, I need to learn how to be on my own. You need to let me. He stood there for a long moment, torn and broken. Sarah, however, had had enough. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and angry. Fine, she snapped. If that's what you want, don't come calling us when you realize you can't manage. She grabbed Michael's arm and pulled him toward the door. Let's go, Michael. He gave me one last, desperate look over his shoulder. A look that said 1,000 things he didn't have the courage to say. Then he turned and followed his wife out of the room, leaving me alone once more. But this time, the solitude felt different. It wasn't the lonely, desolate emptiness of before. It was a space. Quiet, clean, empty space that was now mine to fill. I had reclaimed my life. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I didn't know how I would manage. I was terrified. But for the first time since that horrible Sunday dinner, I wasn't just a victim of my circumstances. I was the architect of my own future. Broken ankle, concussion, and all. Getting home from the hospital was an ordeal. The taxi driver, a burly man with a kind face, helped me navigate the journey from the hospital curb to my front door on a pair of clumsy crutches. Every hop was a jarring reminder of my body's new limitations. But as he closed the door behind me, leaving me alone in my own hallway, the silence that greeted me was not menacing. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a clean slate. The house was exactly as the paramedics had left it, the smear of dirt on the kitchen floor, the chair askew, the faint, lingering smell of antiseptic. Instead of seeing it as a scene of trauma, I saw it as the starting point of my new life. This was day one. My first call was not to a home care agency, but to Carol. Ellie, I've been so worried. I've called and called. Her voice was a torrent of panicked relief. I'm home, I said, my voice cracking with a mix of exhaustion and emotion. Carol, I need your help. She was there in 15 minutes, her car screeching to a halt in my driveway. When she saw me, pale and bruised, leaning on crutches in the middle of my kitchen, her face crumpled. She hugged me carefully, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold distance of my own family. I told her everything. The fall, the hospital, the conversation with Michael and Sarah, my final, terrifying declaration of independence. She listened, her expression shifting from horror to outrage to a fierce, blazing pride. Good for you, Eleanor, she said when I was done, her voice ringing with conviction. It's the hardest thing you've ever had to do, and I've never been more proud of you. Carol's friendship became my lifeline in those first few weeks. She was not a nurse or a servant. She was a partner. She helped me clean up the house, brought me groceries, and drove me to my follow-up appointments. But more importantly, she helped me make a plan, not Sarah's. Together, we found a physical therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Maria who pushed me hard but celebrated every small victory. We hired a local teenager, a sweet girl named Amy, to come in for a few hours after school to help with cleaning and meal prep. Amy wasn't a professional caregiver. She was a helper whom I paid from my own savings, a person I chose to let into my home. The distinction was critical. I was not a patient in my own house. I was the employer. I was in charge. The most significant change, however, happened in Michael's old bedroom. With Carol's help, I moved his bed and desk into the attic. We packed away his baseball trophies and his faded posters. It was an emotional afternoon. Each object was a memory, a piece of the boy I had loved so fiercely. But I wasn't erasing him. I was simply acknowledging that his childhood was over. His room could no longer be a shrine. In its place, we set up my old easel by the window. We bought new watercolor paint Sprite, vibrant colors and fresh, thick paper. The room was no longer Michael's room. It was my studio. For the first week, I just sat in there, getting used to the space. I'd watch the light change, watch the squirrels chase each other up the old oak tree in the backyard. The tree no longer made me sad. It was no longer a monument to a lost family. It was just a tree, beautiful and strong, its branches reaching for the sky regardless of who was watching. Then one day, I picked up a brush. I didn't try to paint the tree. I didn't try to paint anything recognizable. I just dipped the brush in a brilliant shade of yellow and touched it to the paper. Then came a swatch of deep blue. Then a fiery orange. I painted feelings, not objects. I painted the sharp agony of my fall, the cold gray of my loneliness, the burning ember of my anger, and the surprising, sunny yellow of my newfound freedom. The page was a mess of colors, chaotic and emotional, but it was mine. From that day on, I painted every afternoon. My skills were rusty, but they slowly came back. I painted the view from my window, the vase of flowers Carol brought me, the way the light hit the dust motes in my living room. I was not just creating pictures. I was creating a new way of seeing the world. A world where I was the main character, not a supporting role. I started a new routine. Mornings were for my physical therapy exercises, slow, painful movements that gradually rebuilt my strength. Afternoons were for painting. Evenings were for reading books from the library, books I chose, not books from Sarah's approved list of bestsellers. My world, which had once felt so cavernously empty, began to fill up with my own choices, my own interests. It was a smaller world, quieter, but it was infinitely more authentic. Michael tried to call. The first few times, his number would flash on my phone, and my stomach would clench with a familiar mix of hope and dread. I let it go to voicemail every time. His messages were stilted and full of guilt. "Mom, just calling to see how you're doing. I hope you're okay. Please, just let me know you're okay." I knew that answering would pull me right back into the old dynamic. He wanted absolution, a way to soothe his own conscience. He wanted me to say, "It's okay, son. Forgive you. I still need you." And I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the same way. The trust was broken too deeply. Forgiveness was a distant country I hadn't yet found on a map. So, I sent him a text message, the same way he had once dismissed me. "I am managing. Thank you for your concern." It was polite. It was distant. It was the language of strangers. It was the boundary I had promised myself I would enforce. One Saturday, about a month after my fall, Carol convinced me to go with her to the local art fair in the town square. I was nervous about navigating the crowds on my crutches, but the thought of seeing other people's art was exhilarating. The square was bustling with life. Families laughed. Children ran on the grass. And artists stood proudly by their creations. I felt a pang of my old loneliness watching the families, but it was different now. It was a dull ache, not a gaping wound. I was an observer, no longer desperately wishing to be a part of their picture. I was busy creating my own. I was admiring a beautiful series of landscape watercolors when a small voice said my name. "Grandma?" I turned. It was Leo and Mia. They were standing a few feet away, holding ice cream cones, their eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. And behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable, Was Michael. My breath caught in my throat. It was the first time I had seen them since the hospital. The children looked like they had grown an inch. Michael looked like he had aged 5 years. Sarah was nowhere in sight. Grandma. Your leg. Mia said, pointing at my cast. I know. Sweetie. I said, managing a soft smile for her. I had a little accident. But I'm getting better. Michael took a hesitant step forward. Mom. We didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you would be. Either. I replied. My voice neutral. An awkward silence fell. Leo was staring at me. His young face serious. Dad said you were mad at us. He said quietly. The simple, honest words of a child cut through all the adult complexity. My heart ached. I knelt down carefully, balancing on my good leg and one crutch, to be on their level. Oh, sweet boy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I could never, ever be mad at you or your sister. I love you both very much. Always. Mia ran forward and gave me a sticky, ice cream-scented hug. I held her tight, a wave of love so powerful it almost knocked me over, washing through me. This love, the pure, uncomplicated love for my grandchildren, had not been broken. It was the one connection that remained pure. I looked up at Michael over Mia's head. His eyes were filled with tears. He saw the interaction, saw the love that was still there. And I think, in that moment, he understood the magnitude of what he had allowed to be broken. He had not just pushed away his mother. He had damaged his children's access to their grandmother. The cost of his weakness was written on the faces of his own children. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, a man lost in the ruins of a relationship he had helped destroy. I eventually stood up. The moment with the children passing like a brief, warm sunbeam on a cloudy day. Michael was still struggling for words. His face a portrait of regret. They've missed you. He finally managed to say, his voice thick. I've missed you. I'm here. Michael. I said. But my tone was not an invitation. It was a simple statement of fact. I existed. I was moving forward in my own life. The next move, if there was to be one, had to be his. And it had to be more than just a guilty apology in the middle of a town square. He seemed to understand. He nodded, a deep sadness in his eyes. I know. He whispered. He gathered the children, who looked reluctantly from me to him. We should let you enjoy the fair. He gave me one last, searching look, then turned and walked away, his children trailing in his wake. I watched them go. My heart a tangle of sorrow and a strange, hard-won peace. I had not given in. I had held my ground, not out of spite, but out of a necessary act of self-preservation. Life continued. My ankle healed, slowly but surely. I graduated from a cast to a walking boot, then from 2 crutches to 1, and finally, to walking with just a slight limp. Each step was a victory. Each step was my own. My art became my focus. I joined a weekly watercolor class at the community center, the same one Carol had suggested months ago. I was nervous at first, the oldest student in a room full of young mothers and aspiring artists. But I found a quiet joy in learning new techniques, in the camaraderie of shared creation. I made friends, people who knew me not as Michael's mother, but as Eleanor, the woman who painted surprisingly vibrant sunsets. My house transformed along with me. The muted, memory-laden colors of the past were slowly replaced by brighter, bolder ones. I bought new curtains for the living room, a cheerful yellow. I filled the house with plants, bringing green, living things into the quiet rooms. And on the walls, where once only family photos had hung, my own paintings began to appear. Small landscapes of the Ohio countryside, still lives of flowers from my garden. They were not masterpieces, but they were reflections of my world. seen through my own eyes. The house was no longer a museum of what was. It was a gallery of what is. Months passed. Autumn gave way to the deep freeze of winter, which in turn melted into the tentative green of spring. On the anniversary of Tom's death, I didn't spend the day looking at old photos. I took my paints to the cemetery and painted the ancient willow tree that grew by his headstone, capturing the way the new leaves filtered the morning light. It was an act of remembrance, but also an act of life. Then came the Sunday before Thanksgiving. It was a crisp, bright afternoon. I was in my studio, finishing a painting, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Carol was visiting her sister out of state. I opened the door, and my breath caught. It was Michael. He was alone. He was holding a single, perfect apple crumble in a glass baking dish, the same dish that had been mine for 30 years. He looked older, thinner, but there was a new steadiness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. The haunted, guilty look was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. "Hi, Mom," he said. He held out the dessert. "I made this. It's probably not as good as yours." I was silent for a long moment, my hand on the doorknob. My first instinct was to close the door, to protect the peaceful world I had so carefully built. But I looked at his face, and I looked at the peace offering in his hands, and I saw something more than a simple apology. I saw effort. "Why are you here, Michael?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. "I've been in therapy," he said, the words coming out in a rush, as if he were afraid they'd get stuck if he paused. "For the last 6 months. I needed to understand why I was so weak, why I let Sarah, why I said nothing, why I hurt you." This was not what I expected. I realized, he continued, his gaze unwavering, that I spent my whole life leaning on you. You were always my safety net. And when Sarah came along, with her strength and her plans, I started leaning on her instead. I never learned how to stand on my own. When you needed me to be strong, I didn't know how. It was easier to agree, to be quiet. It was cowardly, and I will be sorry for that for the rest of my life. He took a deep breath. "Things with Sarah and me, they're not good. We're trying to work through it. I told her that my relationship with you is not negotiable. Not anymore. Failed you, Mom. But I don't want to live the rest of my life as the man who failed his own mother." He wasn't asking for my forgiveness. Not directly. He wasn't asking to come back into my life as if nothing had happened. He was simply reporting on the man he was trying to become. A man who took responsibility. Slowly, I opened the door wider. "The crumble will get cold," I said. He stepped inside, into a house that was both familiar and new to him. His eyes traveled around the living room, taking in the yellow curtains, the vibrant paintings on the walls. He looked at the space where the shrine of family photos used to be. "The house looks nice," he said. "It looks like you." "It is me," I replied simply. I took the baking dish from him and led him into the kitchen. I made 2 cups of tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my world had fallen apart almost a year ago. We ate the apple crumble in a comfortable silence. It wasn't as good as mine. He was right, but it was the single best thing he had ever given me. Our relationship would never be the same. The innocent, unconditional bond between mother and child was gone forever, shattered by that one cruel sentence. It could not be rebuilt. But perhaps something new could be grown in its place. Something quieter, more honest. A relationship between 2 adults, both flawed, both learning to stand on their own feet. One of them just happened to be the other's mother. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mom," he said, "I don't think you're a stranger. I think I was the stranger. I was a stranger to myself. I'm trying to find my way back." I nodded, accepting his words. After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car pull away. The house was quiet again. But the silence was not empty. It was full of potential. My life was not defined by my son's presence or his absence. It was defined by me. By the colors I chose to put on paper. By the friends I chose to embrace. By the quiet strength I had found in the wreckage of my old life. I had been broken. Yes. But in the breaking, I had been remade. And the woman I was now, this Eleanor Vance who stood on her own 2 feet in her own bright, beautiful house, was a woman I was finally, truly, proud to know.